Thank you for joining us for Patient Conversations with Leah, a place where patients and caregivers can talk with me about the real, relevant, and yes, even the raw aspects of their lung cancer journey. Because we want to know and understand these perspectives firsthand from those who are the true experts on what life is like for a young adult diagnosed with lung cancer. This morning, I'm so excited to announce that I'm here with Stephen Huff. He is a 7-year survivor of stage 4 young lung cancer. So I'm going to let him explain kind of his journey, how he was diagnosed, and where he's been since then.
Hey, good morning, Leah. Thank you again for having me on. I feel like I took good care of myself and exercise, nutrition. Was fortunate enough to be, I guess, good enough to play baseball in college, and then even after a couple years professionally in the White Sox organization. So I would say up until probably the age of 26, I was in peak physical condition. And when you think about lung cancer, at least for me, my experience was, it was a smoker's disease, and that was really the end of it. And I mean, I understood about cancer. My mother works in cancer research, or did. She dedicated her career. So I understood the risks and things of that nature, what to look out for. But it was sort of this unusual season of life. I thought, if I can't be a player, then maybe I could be a coach. So I was probably halfway through grad school at the time, in 27, 28, somewhere in there. And I was not exercising as much. I was still exercising, but not as much as, I was as an athlete. And I just started to notice like some things that were like unusual for me, at least. One of the things I remember was just getting out of breath. And, when you haven't been involved in athletics, and you're like, okay, maybe this is normal, right? Like maybe this is what happens when you're not, running every day. But I was getting out of breath quickly, and I was doing student teaching, and I was just having a hard time, with coughing, just like persistent coughing, but it was interruptive coughing is what I remember the most. I would just be casually talking like we are right now, and all of a sudden I'd have to cough real quick. Um, so I remember one of the my mentors at the time, my teacher, she said, she was like, "Oh, it's probably laryngitis, because you're not used to talking so much." So that there again, that I stopped exercising. I might have laryngitis. So I was really convincing myself that these are all normal things. So um, at the tail end of 2016, I had just got my first high school teaching job and was so excited to be starting my second life. Now it's okay. We're settled. We had just bought our first house on April 1st of 2017. We were engaged to get married that fall. And then my symptoms came back, and they were actually just getting more in the way, and to the point now, where I couldn't ignore them. I was trying to lie down at night and go to sleep, and I was having a really hard time breathing, and I felt like I was always just trying to cough to clear my throat. And it wasn't until around January of 2017, I was driving home from school one day, and I was just happened to be rubbing my neck, and I felt what I can describe as a very hard nodule in my collarbone. And I showed Emily, and she's like, "Stephen, I think you should go to a doctor." So I did. I went to a walk-in clinic, and I was told that I had a chest X-ray. I was told I had bronchitis. So I was given antibiotics. They even looked at the nodule, and they said, "Yeah, it's fine. You're young." And I said, "Okay, all right." So I tried the antibiotics. Those didn't work. And, I just kept pushing. I said, "Okay, what's next?" And so I set up a an appointment with my primary, and he felt it. He same thing. He said, "I don't think it's anything to be worried about." And I think the overarching theme was always, "You're young and you're healthy, and you're 29 and you don't have any smoking habit, nothing that could indicate something was serious going on." So he got another X-ray, and he said that this time I had pneumonia, double pneumonia. So I'm like, wow, never had pneumonia my whole life. So, and it was, this was like February or March. So, as we were approaching the end of the school year, I just sort of kept on with my doctor, and we were going through these steps of, first an X-ray, then we had this ultrasound did, came back inconclusive. Then finally he was like, "All right, Stephen, think I can get your insurance to approve it because we've gone through these channels now." And I remember looking at the calendar, and I booked it for the first day after school ended. And this is the first day as a high school teacher, summer break. I'm going to go get this CT scan, and then everything else after this is going to be great. So I went to the imaging center, and I had never had a CT. Actually, I might have, but it was sports related prior. So I had the CT scan done. I get in my car and I start to drive home. So my phone rings and I don't recognize the number, other than it just says my doctor's office. I was driving, my heart started racing out of my chest, and he said, "Stephen," he says, "I don't know what's going on in your body, but whatever it is, it's very serious. And I have booked an appointment for you tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. with an oncologist." And I'm just like, "An oncologist? You mean like a cancer doctor?" And he said, "Yes." And I just knew at that point all the symptoms that I had been ignoring, slash, sort of telling myself there's a reason I'm having these symptoms for this, amount of time, this hard lymph node. I just knew, I knew, I said, something serious is going on. My entire world has come to a screeching halt. And the only thing I could think of is the worst case scenario, which at the time I didn't even know what it was. So, gathered myself, drove home, and we went through the radiology report, and I just remember reading everything, and I was like, "Wow, this is terrible. This is awful." So thankfully, I had this lymph node in my neck, and they were able to do a core needle biopsy, as opposed to like a bronchoscopy. So it took probably a week or so to get the first portion, the biopsy, to confirm adenocarcinoma, non-small cell lung cancer. And then it took probably another 2 to 3 weeks to get the full biomarker testing, which ultimately, showed that I had ALK positive rearrangement. So yeah, that was my diagnosis.
I mean, what a journey. Listening to you, it just, I was a former high school teacher. I know that feeling. Like, it was like a dream come true to become a teacher. I loved the high school kids. I loved all the enthusiasm and their silliness and all the things. And
Mhm.
anticipating that first summer, like, you're like, I've been in school for my whole life. I've done this, and now I've really gotten here, and I just can't imagine. And I remember the panic attack basically I had when I found out, and I was 43 years old. I had at the time a 14, a 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And it was shocking. I mean, it was absolutely shocking. And being as young as you were, and, I ran the morning that I went and had my CT, then was immediately admitted to the hospital. So I get it. Like, you're one of those, we are those people, the healthy people. This is never going to happen. And then it does. So I just, I can totally
Yeah.
relate to your feelings. So
Yeah.
I think that so when I was first diagnosed, you were one of the first people I found, and I started like reading, and I was like, "Oh, look, he's so much younger and he's doing well." And then I remember when you got married, and then it was like, "Oh my gosh, he's having kids." And I was like, "This is amazing." Because, everything you read online is gloom and doom. And I don't know for you, but when I was first diagnosed, it felt really lonely. Like, I didn't really know anybody that had lung cancer, much less someone who was young. Like, how does it feel to be the one that's here 7 years later when you've watched so many others that you've encountered not be as fortunate?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a new challenge that we're facing as lung cancer patients, because we are seeing such improvements from these treatments and medications that have quite literally just been, invented in the last 10 years. And so for me, the biggest and strongest reminder that I can do is actually started this, I would say, probably about 2 years ago. I have a log that I keep in my personal notebook and diary of all my friends that I make along the way in the journey. And I'm making a concerted effort to reference that at least once, either a day or every other day. And I'll just reach out to someone in their family, whether that's on social media, through text, and I'll just say that, hey, I'm just thinking about, and I just want to check in on your family and make sure everyone's doing well. And I think that that goes a really long way in the healing process because, you know, yes, I'm still alive after 7 years. There's times where I still face, daily challenges of even just being scared about what my future is. And in the next year or 5 years, what does that look like for me? And so I think that's my system that I have in place is,
I mean, but it is kind of, you know, just a odd spot to be in. Like, what makes me different than someone else?
yeah. Well,
Why
the
am I
hard,
reacting to the medicine better or whatnot?
yeah, yeah. And I think, initially, like probably if you had asked me maybe like 5 years or 3 years ago, I would have been like, it's hard for me. I don't really know what to say. I'm I'm still very close with a couple of my good friends, either their spouses or someone in their family. And when I see them, all I say is I'm sorry. And I was like, how cool would it be if I had some sort of daily reminder of all the amazing people that have had such an impact on me as a cancer patient and just a friend. And how can I be more, proactive and just like telling them how special they were. And so that's when I really was like, okay, I'm gonna reach out to family members, folks that I still have like, Facebook friends or text messages. And here's a reminder of all the beautiful souls that have been taken from this disease. So make sure that you spend your time wisely and appreciate, responding so well to treatment.
Yeah, I totally
Yeah.
agree. Kind of in that same vein, 7 years ago when you were diagnosed, and there, I'm sure, was not a whole lot of information out there about what you were dealing with, and statistics were dated and horrible. Um, and the feelings that you had in those early days, weeks, months, even, and I think the first year is kind of like a blur. I mean, to me at least it was. And I know you jumped in and, started doing advocacy work, which I commend because I don't, I was still trying to figure out when the world was going on. But if you knew all that you know now, how do you think that that would have changed the way you lived, you've been living your advocacy, your family planning, just like everything that you've done since then? If you had all this information at your fingertips before you were diagnosed, because so many people today still say, these young people we meet, newly diagnosed, I never knew I could get lung cancer. But if you
Yeah.
could go back and know that was an option or a possibility, how do you think that would have changed things for you?
Yeah, I think, wow, that's a really good question, Leah. I don't know that I've ever sat down and thought about it. So I'll take a quick second here. I know I can think of one thing for sure. So I sort of, so going back to the advocacy, when I was diagnosed, um, of course, going through all the mental and the struggles and even the physical struggles too, but just wrapping my brain around why me? And in 2017, it was hard to find any good, really, information on the internet about survivorship and what that looked like and, you know, what treatment options were there. So it was scarce to say the least. And I think, I had a conversation with my oncologist about this. Like, I said, why are the statistics like, why are they the way that they are? Like, why is lung cancer, you're telling me that this is the number one cancer killer. It affects men, women, of all ages. It affects smokers, non-smokers. I'm like, but why isn't the survival rate, you know, 90% or 100% of this if we know that this is such a common thing? And he kind of looks at me and she's like, yeah. She goes, Stephen, it's really sad, but there's a big stigma associated with lung cancer. And, from the outsider looking in, I think a lot of people view it as a smoker's disease and like you sort of did this to yourself. And that, to be quite frank, that really pissed me off because it didn't register, until that moment of my life that was me. I used to think that. And the fact that I'm so ill-informed, it pissed me off, to be 100% honest. So I said, I can do something about this. I can fight back. It's going to take me a few weeks to start my treatment because we don't fully know what I have yet, but I can do something, right? Like I can use my story. Um, and I think I went home maybe that day. I started researching how to start your own 501(c)(3), how to file the paperwork and set up the bank accounts. I got some guidance from a friend of mine who's a CPA, and I said, you know what? We're going to raise money and we're going to donate it to lung cancer research. And that was really the impetus for how we started our organization. Now, going back to your question, Leah, I think in retrospect, like had I been diagnosed, let's just say I was diagnosed today, things are very different in 2024 than they are in 2017. And I just feel like the landscape's very different today than it was even 7 years ago. So had I been diagnosed today, I feel like my advocacy may have been like tapered in a way. It sort of would have been like, okay, well, maybe I'll just go online and find someone and start, reaching out to folks. Maybe it wouldn't have inspired me as much, to try to start my own 501(c)(3) and whatnot. But we still have a long way to go. Anytime I'm like sharing my story, I'm like, all right, guys, I'm going to talk to you about the big C word. And everyone's like expecting me to say cancer. And I'm like, no, we're going to talk about cure. We're going to talk about cure because, we have made tremendous strides in the last decade, but, we'll never stop. I know you'll never stop and I'll never stop until we get a cure, right?
So like when I was first diagnosed and I was diagnosed in the emergency room after I'd been diagnosed with a myriad of other things like asthma, allergies, pneumonia, all the things. And the ER doctor was very insensitive. And my mom and my husband were in the room with me. And he said, well, have you looked at your CT yet? And I'm like, well, no, because that was before it like really just automatically dropped into your my chart. So he turned the screen to me and he said, well, read this line right here. That's what we're most concerned about. And it was lytic lesions present at L4 and L5, highly concerning for metastatic cancer. Mic drop.
Wow.
And, I immediately went to, what do you mean? Metastatic means late stage. Like I just ran this morning and I have kids. And my whole thing was, I literally think it was a panic attack. And I had everybody, when they finally admitted me upstairs, I think everyone, including the hospitalist and nurse practitioner, were crying along with me. But all I could say is, my work is not done here. I have got children. My work is not done here. And I think about how amazing it was to watch you start a family and like everybody cheering you on because this was just something that was not necessarily commonplace. So can you kind of explain to me like how your drive to live has and life and advocacy and all has changed? Because I know kids a lot of times do motivate a lot of the things we do and your love for your children.
Wow. Yeah. I remember talking to my doctor. So we're sitting in there and she hands me, the full biopsy report. This was on June 21st. And she goes, okay, Stephen, you hit the jackpot. And I'm like, what do you mean? That's a weird thing to say to someone that just, she goes, all things considered, she goes, you have this ALK positive rearrangement. And she goes, it's a very small percentage of lung cancer patients, non-small cell. But she goes, we have great drugs for this. And we have more in the pipeline that are coming out. So she goes, I think you're going to do really well. She said that to me. And that was like, what? I was like, what do you mean I'm going to do really well? She goes, you're 29 and I know you're engaged, and I just think you should go to a fertility clinic and bank sperm because when you start this treatment, they're very new. We don't have any research data about, trying to get pregnant or what it does to your fertility. She goes, you should do this. And I'm like, okay. So we leave, and Emily was very quiet, on the ride home. And I was literally about to start this new treatment, like within the next 1 to 2 days. And Emily and I were sitting in the guest bedroom at her parents' house because we were staying with them at the time, I think. And it was very quiet. We're both sitting in bed, like just kind of like looking at the wall. And she's like, I think you should do it. And I'm like, what? I should do what? And she's like, you should go to the fertility center and bank sperm. And I'm like, Emily, I listen. I said, we're engaged. I'm 2 seconds away from just going to a deserted island like an injured animal and just, like being a blip in the radar of your memory. Like I'm surprised she still wanted to move forward with the wedding, and I was just so concerned about bringing everyone down with me. That was my big thing is I was like, I just don't want to hurt anyone else. Like, we're not married yet. Like, I have a great family support, but I just didn't want to hurt anybody. And so that was my big thing. And I was like, Emily, I don't know. I really don't know. I can't think about having kids, like, let alone even getting married. And thankfully I did. So, fast forward a year into my first treatment, I was feeling so good. I mean, I literally I felt like I was back to normal. I was breathing well, exercising well. My scans were all coming back, strong and positive. And Emily and I were in the doctor's appointment, and we had told her, my physician, like, hey, we did it. Like, just so you know, she was like, that's great. She's like, so when are you guys gonna, start having kids? And we kind of looked at each other because we hadn't really thought about it up to that point. And we on the drive home, we're like, like we could do this. Like I could live for a really long time, and we don't want to look back and be like, you know, we didn't have the opportunity. Yes, we did because I banked the sperm and so Emily and I had always dreamed about having lots of kids. She comes from a big Italian family, so that's a very common thing. Like, and I was like, for sure, I want to have at least two. She could maybe convince me into three, but we had the long, serious talk about it, and we said, this is what we've always wanted to do. We're not going to let cancer dictate. I'm in a really good place. I'm responding well to treatment, being proactive. Like, how do we beat cancer? We beat cancer by living the life that we've always dreamed and inspired to. And so, yeah, we started the process for in vitro, and Emily, um, she's a trooper. She's great. Even the people at the IVF center were kind of like, wait, he has cancer? You guys sure you want to do this? We're like, yeah, yeah, we're sure. And so we went through the process, and so we got through the end, and we had three embryos. And yeah, we started, I think it was probably like, let's see, it was probably the tail end of 2019, and Emily got pregnant. We were so excited. We didn't tell anyone, and we waited, I think maybe, I don't know, till early spring. And of course, everyone was over the moon. And so we had our first baby boy on January 29th of 2020, Owen Huff. And he is happy, healthy, sweet little angel that absolutely has us wrapped around his finger. And it's the only time that I really get emotional. Sorry.
No, I
Um,
get.
yeah, yeah. Just talking about, uh, going from getting this diagnosis told that the survival rate was, I think it was like maybe less than 10% or something at the time I was diagnosed, and being able to welcome, this sweet boy, it's life changing, life changing. And, Emily and Owen have given me the two best titles that I could ever have in my life, which is husband and dad. And And I feel like that's how you beat cancer. I could be totally wrong. That's just my personal opinion, is you don't let cancer control every aspect of your life. You fight back by getting up, taking care of yourself, and pushing and putting one foot in front of the other. And that's the life that we've always dreamed of. So Owen is now 4.5, and he's doing great. He is about to start preschool, or I'm sorry, he's about to start kindergarten, which, I mean, gosh, you want to talk about milestones of life? Like, at one point I was like, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to be able to have kids. Now, Emily and I, we're married. We have 2 kids. So yeah, anyways, about 2 years ago, we started the process again, and we had 2 embryos in the freezer, and then on August 1st of last year, we welcomed our sweet baby girl, Violet. So Violet is happy and healthy, and she has a huge personality. She just turned 1. So we are going through all the things that a young parent goes through with, new challenges, focusing our energy on supporting and loving our kids, but also our relationship. Emily and our relationship, we both work full time. And so to feel like I'm facing a lot of the challenges that everyone in the world faces is amazing. And I don't have words for it. All I can say is, Confucius, I have this quote written in my journal that I reference about once a day, and it's, everyone has 2 lives, and the second one starts when you realize you only have one. And so for me, it was the time that I got my diagnosis. That's when my second life started, and it's really allowed me to focus on what's important, which is my family, my faith, and everything else will take care of itself. So yeah, that's my 2 cents about starting a family.
I think that's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
I just, it makes me so happy for you. And I remember those days with the little ones. And, it's funny when I was diagnosed, and for whatever reason, I had an oncologist that told me 6 to 12 months before they knew my biomarker. And then the next person told me 2 years. And I decided then I started Googling, and, they're like, oh, 5% of patients are still living in 5 years. And I was like, well, I've got these kids, and,
Mhm.
somebody's got to be one of the 5%. So it's going to be me. And that was like
Mhm.
my slogan from day one. I'm going to be the
Mhm.
5%,
Mhm.
it's not an option. That's just how it's going to be. And my goal I set for myself was to see my oldest graduate from high school, which would be, well, he just graduated in May, which so 4.5 years from diagnosis. And so I'm glad
Mhm.
you all took that
Mhm.
chance. I know we're getting close to time, so I just want to ask you one more question, just to kind of wrap things up, and you can answer it quick. You don't have to elaborate. I know it could be a lengthy question, but you know, um, 7 years later, you're still in the space of lung cancer, and you are young lung cancer before there was ever even that term. I mean, they didn't really call it that even when I was diagnosed. And people are still surprised that they can get young lung cancer and whatnot. And you've seen a lot of change, like you said. You've seen medications come on the market. You've seen people living longer. From here, where we are today, what do you think is the biggest change that we need to see so we can continue and more of us can live these longer lives, and you can be here to see your kids get married and your grandkids, because that's what we need. So what do you think is the biggest thing that we need as a community in order to have that possibility for all of us?
Yeah, well, I think about it in 2 different buckets, really, because you have folks like you and I, Leah, that we're in the throes of it. We have already been diagnosed, we have started treatments. And so for you and I, what's most important is treatments, I think. What what new treatments, what new developments, what can we do from, going back to your point about, is it exercise, diet, what information can we get that will allow you and I to live longer, current patients? And I think that I am extremely excited about ALK positive specifically, but just lung cancer generally. The focus and energy that's being put on lung cancer, on new treatments. I was just talking to some friends in the pharmaceutical industry about what's next, and there's a lot of really exciting things in the pipeline for lung cancer patients. And they take time, but they're being a lot of money, a lot of really brilliant minds. So very much, a point of focus, I think, worldwide and globally, which is amazing. Um, but then the second bucket is, newly diagnosed and or just right before diagnosis. Like, how can we improve, um, not only just like the how to capture lung cancer earlier? Is there, can we get a standardization similar to that of like colorectal cancer or breast cancer or prostate cancer, where we can have an early indication on what an actual lung cancer early diagnosis can be and what does that look like from a diagnostic standpoint? But I think holistically, the messaging of like are the symptoms of lung cancer, and how can we get that messaging broadcasted and implemented in a way where, when you have a cough or you have a very common symptom of lung cancer, how can we rule that out earlier? So I think there's a lot of room for growth as it relates to both. But that's how I view it, is a multi-pronged attack. And one of the attacks is offensive, where how can we find this earlier? How can we be more proactive? What are some of the diagnostic measures? And then on a defensive standpoint, how can we make our treatments curative? And I think that should always be the end goal, is with cure in mind. Like, I love the fact that we have these treatments that allow us to live full, rich lives. Um, they're certainly better than the alternative, but we should always have a vision and dream and a goal. And when we lay our heads down on the pillows at night, our goal should be to find a cure. So that's my I guess view on both.
I love it. I feel like we could talk for hours and like we could have like a 3-part series with you, but I know your time is valuable and I'm just so thankful to actually meet you in real life after all these years of just being an admirer of all that you've done. I know this will be very inspirational for all of our viewers, and I think this is getting the attention of not only patients but also researchers and doctors. So I think everyone will learn from you, and I just can't thank you enough for being here today.
Thank you, Leah. And I feel the same way about getting to meet you. You're such a rock star and
Thanks.
such a amazing advocate and inspiring so many folks across patients, caregivers, care providers, everyone, and Lindy equally as much. So thank you both for doing all this. Really, it's amazing.
Thank you.